Never before had a Senate hearing drawn the attention that the Clarence Thomas judiciary hearing drew. It started out innocently enough until the last-minute testimony of a woman by the name of Anita Hill. You remember that? Instantly, the focus shifted to the moral turpitude of Judge Thomas. One of the highest judges in the land, a black man, suddenly found himself accused of sexual harassment. The charge was serious. The judge was being condemned as a person unfit to sit on the bench by Joe Biden, then a senator from Delaware, who now is the President of the United States. As the entire nation watched, the Senate Judiciary Committee sat presiding over the interrogation. Having been nominated to sit as a justice on the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas was undergoing an unparalleled character assassination with unsubstantiated innuendos. This 11th hour attack threatened to ruin his life and career while preventing him from sitting on the bench of the Supreme Court. The issue was critical. Did Thomas possess the personal character necessary to sit in judgment of others? Thomas eventually was cleared of all wrongdoings and found to be competent to serve on the highest court in the land, and he serves there today. The story of Job is one of high drama as well. Job had been accusing God, the judge of heaven and earth, of injustice, and had demanded his day in court to present his case against God. Having charged God with being unfit to sit on his own throne, the issue at stake was the judge's competency to rule the universe. Is God qualified to preside over all creation? That was the issue. The Creator had been charged with wrongdoing by one of his creatures and must defend his own glory and honor. But near the end of the proceeding, the case took an unexpected turn. Rather than God himself taking the witness stand, as Job had hoped, God chose to put Job, the plaintiff, on the stand and examine him. No other witness was brought forward. No other evidence was submitted. No more cross-examination was needed. God himself was in control of this entire court scene. Job had asked for a hearing with God so that he might present his case before him. Job chapter 31, verse 35. Job wanted God to present a bill of indictment with specific charges, which Job believed himself to be adequately prepared to answer. But when Job got what he wanted, a day in court with God, he did not want what he got. God suddenly burst on the scene and spoke to Job out of a whirlwind, asking him over 70 questions. What follows is the longest conversation in the Bible in which God speaks. If you can learn about someone by his words, there's much for us to learn about God here. The theophany, or appearance of God that Job had asked for, finally arrived. And right out of the box, it is determined that God rules over Job. Verses 1 through 3, beginning in verse 1, chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, God suddenly broke his long silence and spoke to Job in anger, directly, audibly, powerfully. A fierce whirlwind blew across the landscape where Job was standing, dramatizing the awkwardness of this divine encounter. In like manner, God spoke to Moses out of a turbulent storm in Exodus chapter 19. He also spoke to his prophets in a similar fashion in 1 Kings chapter 19 and Ezekiel chapter 1. This turbulent twister conveyed the awesome power and infinite force of God and his spoken words. Verse 2. Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? We'll find that Job will finally be willing to say that he has uttered words without knowledge. That's an awful sin. I think we have a lot of that today. Those talk programs on television not only commit this sin, but most of them are the most asinine things imaginable. They accomplish nothing at all, but they make for entertainment and are prepared by some very light-headed people. God says, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? One man said he liked the dictionary because the stories in it were so short. Well, there are a great many people who pull a few words out of the dictionary and attempt to put them together. And whether they make sense or not doesn't seem to be the point, as long as they're using big words. And not only does God rule over Job, but God rules over the earth. Verses 4 through 7. Let's start with verses 3 and 4. Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee an answer. I will demand and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. This is the verse that I have always wanted to put in the front of every book on geology, but they won't let me do it. It makes no difference whether the book was written by a Christian or a non-Christian. I think it should be put in those books. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. By the way, where were you or I? That's a good question. What is it that holds this universe in space? And it's not standing still. You and I are on a little earth that is as unstable in itself as anything can be. There's nothing under it to hold it up. I don't even know which is under, which is down or up, as far as the universe is concerned. Why doesn't it start going in some direction? But the scientists tell us that it's still just going around and around the whole universe. What keeps it going around and around? Apparently it has been doing this for a long time. The question is, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? A geologist once took Dr. J. Vernon McGee up to a ridge in northern Arizona, and this is what Dr. McGee said. I think it was a ridge, but it was just sand. I couldn't understand why sand was piled up there. The geologist kicked away the sand, and under it was a petrified log. I asked, where did this come from? He said, California. And I said, who hauled it in here? He answered, it floated in here. Now, if you look at that Arizona desert, it's hard to imagine that there was ever any water that could have floated that log. But according to him, that's just what happened. That log had floated in from California. And I asked, when did this happen? He said, well, about 250,000 years ago. And he said it like he'd been there when the log arrived. Now, it may be that he was right. I'm not contradicting him and saying that he was wrong, but I think it more probable that it floated in on the flood of Noah a lot sooner than that. I'm saying that there are a lot of folks today who want to know what took place millions and millions of years ago, but they weren't there. God was. God asked Job, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding." Then in verse 5 and 6, "Who hath laid the measure thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof?" The book of Job apparently comes from the period before the word of Scripture was written, before the writings of Moses in 1491 BC on Mount Sinai. God begins with Job at the point where he began with all men at that particular time, at the point of creation. Paul began at this same point when he talked about the revelation of God to all mankind. Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through 20, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, but God has showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." It's all important for us to see that God was speaking to Job and to all men in that day through his creation. They were close enough to creation that there were no atheists. Instead, there was polytheism. They actually worshiped the creature rather than the creator. This is what Paul went on to speak about in the next two verses in Romans chapter 1, verse 21 and 23. "Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became foolish, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image, an idol, made like a corruptible man, and to birds and to four-footed beasts and creeping things." They didn't stop with just making an idol of what could look like a human figure, but they made idols out of birds and four-footed beasts and snakes. Verse 7, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." Actually, man is a Johnny-come-lately in God's universe. There was a joy in creation even before man was created. And not only does God rule over Job and the earth, but God rules over the sea. Verses 8 through 11, beginning in verse 8. "Or who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb?" Shifting his line of questioning to the earth's oceans, God asked, who shut up the sea behind doors? This pictures the ocean as being restrained by closed doors, even in its place and kept there by divine decree. This sovereign placement first occurred when it burst forth from the womb. Here the creation of the ocean is pictured as the earth giving birth. This is a reference to the depths below the surface, below Earth's surface, from which waters flowed with the flood. Genesis chapter 7, when it says the waters beneath the earth were broken up. Or in Genesis chapter 49. And then in Job chapter 38, verse 9 and 10, When I made the cloud the garment thereof, the garment of the ocean, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and break up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors. At that critical time, God made the clouds its garments, the ocean's garment, and wrapped it in thick darkness, like clothing a newborn baby in swaddling clothes. The sea is not a ferocious force independent of leadership, but is under the sovereign direction of God. It was at this time of creation that God fixed limits for the shoreline. The ocean could not go beyond these fixed points because God set its doors and bars in place, as if bolted shut and held in place. The sea is restrained in its appointed place by God, who controls all of his creation. Now in verse 11, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further. Here shall thy proud waves be stayed. If the arrogant ocean knew its place and boundaries, then why did not Job know his limits? And not only does God rule over Job, the earth, and the sea, but God rules over the sun. Verses 12 through 15, beginning in verse 12. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place? Shifting his questioning to the rotation of the earth's sphere, God pressed Job harder. Have you ever given orders to the morning? That is, had Job ever commanded the morning to appear, the sun to arise, or shown the dawn its place? Had Job ushered in the morning or evening, even one time? The implied answer is no. Only God has done this. Thus, only God had the right to order and command the events of Job's life, and only he could do so with precision. Verse 13, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it. Such divine directives were issued so the ocean might take the earth by its edges, like a person grasping the corners of a blanket. This describes the removing of darkness by God as dawn is unveiled. This was an act which seemingly uncovered the wicked, leaving them no place to hide. Now verse 14. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. So describing the rotation of the earth, God said, the earth takes shape like clay under a seal. The earth is pictured as a document written on a clay tablet. Its surface is changed when a seal is rolled or impressed upon it. So it is when the sun rises and the light of day causes the earth's surface to stand out and appear different. Thus the earth's globe is represented as turning, causing the night to change to day. Just as the surface of the earth is unveiled, so the wicked are exposed as each new day dawns. Verse 15, and from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. The wicked are denied their light. The night is when the wicked are active and carry out their heinous acts. But when denied the night, they are hindered from carrying out their deeds of darkness, as if their upraised arm is broken. Job could not control the plight of the wicked. God answered Job's question about the seemingly prosperous plight of the wicked by noting that he exposed them. And not only does God rule over Job, the earth, the sea, and the sun, but God rules over the deeps. Verses 16 through 18, beginning in verse 16. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Certainly Job didn't know the depth of the ocean. That wasn't found out until 3,530 years later, when in 2010 the United States Center for Coastal and Ocean measured the depth of the Challenger Deep at 36,070 feet, or 6.83 miles deep. That's 7,000 feet lower than Mount Everest is tall. God knew that. He knew the depth of the ocean on the day of its creation. Verse 17. Have the gates of death been opened unto thee, or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Again, a negative answer was anticipated. The implication being that such things were too deep for Job. He wouldn't know. The mystery of divine providence is too deep for man to grasp. Verse 18. Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it if thou knowest it all. Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth, God said. The point here was that Job had not grasped the deep things of God's physical creation. These were countless enigmas and mysteries of which Job was ignorant. Yet God wasn't. He knew it all. In an argument from the lesser to the greater, the implication is that neither had Job understood the deep matters of God's spiritual kingdom. Mockingly, God chided Job, "Tell me if you know all this." Job remained silent, dumbfounded by the profound workings of God's providence in creation. And not only does God rule over Job, the earth, the sea, the sun, and the deeps, but God rules over the light. Verses 19 through 21. Beginning in verse 19. Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? You see, God continues his cross-examination with probing questions designed to remind Job that God alone is the creator and thus is superior to Job. This science exam next proceeded to the subject of light and darkness. God queries Job, what is the way to the abode of light? Where did the light of the sun go at night? And where does darkness reside? Or where did the darkness go during the day? Verse 20. That thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths to the house thereof. And even if Job knew where the light and the darkness dwelled, God asked, can you take them to their places? That is, did Job have the power to command them to their respective places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Again, a negative response was anticipated by God from Job. And then verse 21. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? If Job was in the dark about simple matters of God's physical creation, how could he possibly be in the light about God's spiritual kingdom? Surely you know, God challenged, for you were already born at the time of creation, weren't you, Job? Job's arrogant demands of God seem to assume that Job too predated creation. The point God was making is that he alone preceded creation. Job's various assertions in earlier chapters were presumptuous because he was ignorant of creation and therefore ignorant of how creation works. Job's assumptions were derived from a false perspective about the positions of God and man. Forgotten by Job was the truth that God was the creator and Job was the creation, not the other way around. Never must the righteous lose sight of the lofty, exalted position that God occupies. A loss of the heavenly perspective can lead to catastrophic results in the life of a believer. The prayer of Nehemiah reminds believers of God's high position as Creator. In Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 6, "Thou, even thou, art Lord alone. Thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth, and all the things that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein, and thou preservest them all, and the host of heaven worshipeth thee." Only God created all there is, and he alone gives life. By virtue of his position as Creator, God is Lord over all his creation. He has the divine right to do with it whatever he pleases. The Lord is the potter, and we are the clay. Romans chapter 9, verse 20 and 21. He is the shepherd, and we are the sheep. He is the master. We are the slaves. He is the Father. We are his children. Never must the believer lose sight of the position of God as he reigns and rules in the heavens, doing whatever he pleases. Do you have a proper heavenly perspective? Do you submit to God as Creator and understand that you are a part of his creation? Only when you understand God's lofty position will you understand your humble position before him. Then you will relate to your Creator in the right way as you see him as he truly is. Well, I've covered half of chapter 38 this evening, and we'll pick this up next Wednesday night and follow on. Brother Steve, would you close us in prayer?